Good evening. I want to officially welcome you to a very special program this evening as we celebrate the official unveiling of the Stribling Brock German POW letter, now a part of the Beeman Library Special Collections and Archives here at Lipscomb. Now, it's the official because this has been going on for several days now. I've watched the news. I was in Florida and saw this on the NBC Nightly News several weeks ago. So it's the unveiling, but it's the official unveiling. So this collection has been celebrated in local, state, regional, national, and international media because it really gives a very special voice to World War II. And it opens the door to something that was completely hidden from me before. Before we get started, I want to kind of recognize some distinguished guests from Lawrenceburg and Lawrence County. This is really a Germany and Lawrence County story. These are people that are here, and I'd like you to stand when I introduce you. The mayor of Lawrenceburg, Keith Durham. There you are. Ethan Hadley, President and CEO of the Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce. And April Judkins, head of Lawrenceburg Main Street. April? I also like to recognize Ms. Manny Beers Grinder, who is the Commissioner of Tennessee Department of Veterans Services in front. And then Tim and Lynn Pettis, who have a very special connection to this event. Lynn discovered the letters in the cornflake box. Now, you know, this is an interesting thing. My wife and I have conversations all the time about what to keep and not to keep. I'm labeled as a hoarder, and I make sure that she knows that these were found in a cornflake box somewhere. So there are some things that are really important to keep. Several months ago, I was fortunate enough to sit at lunch with Curtis Peters and Tim Johnson and Charlie McVeigh and several of our great library faculty. And as we talked and I listened to this story of the discovery of the letters, I was completely fascinated. I was fascinated by how the letters were discovered. I was fascinated that the letters even existed. And the serendipitous way that the letters were found and the way that Tim Johnson connected with Curtis at a restaurant and, the great moment there. But I was even more fascinated when I heard what the letters said in their translation. Most of you know that story by now. During the war, a German POW camp was located in Lawrenceburg. The prisoners were contracted out to local farms as day laborers, and many of those prisoners, in doing that day labor, got to know the locals quite well. And then the really interesting thing, when the war ended and the prisoners returned to their homes in Germany, they kept the relationship going, writing letters back and forth from American to Germany. One Lawrenceburg family, the Brocks, kept the letters. And in the 1980s, one of their descendants, Lynn Pettis, found close to 400 of these letters in a cornflake box. Curtis Peters, an in-law of the Brock family and a member of the Lawrence County Historical Society, kept the letters and made presentation over the years about the letters, talked about the letters, wrote about the letters. Earlier this year, Mr. Peters met Dr. Tim Johnson. Again, serendipitously. Dr. Johnson is our university research professor in history, politics, and philosophy. And they developed this conversation and a deep common interest in the letters. And that eventually led to Mr. Peters, through his great generosity, donating the letters to Lipscomb this past April. Over the past few months, Dr. Charles McVeigh, professor of German in the English and Modern Languages Department, translated those letters. And it's in that translation that the full richness of a moment of history that escaped me and probably most of you unfolded. I want to especially thank Special Collections librarian Elizabeth Rivera and University archivist Marie Byers for what they've done to make all of this possible. They've worked tirelessly with many of those involved to make the letters part of our special collection and archives in Beeman Library. So tonight you're going to hear from a lot of these people, others that I've not mentioned that Dr. Johnson will mention to you in a minute. And what you will hear tonight, I think, is an especially timely story. This is the 70th anniversary of World War II. And it's a story that's timely in light of the events in our world today. It's a world that's filled with war. It's a world that's filled with acrimonious politics. But these letters are not a story of war. They're a story of amazing reconciliation, a story where you can take away the hate and politics of war, and you can find human beings talking to each other, conversing with each other across the miles, over the ocean, just trying to survive and seeking relationship. It's a story of people who were far from home and lonely, and those who sought to reach out the hand of reconciliation. And interestingly, it's a story of two peoples who were at war but became great friends. So it's a story that we are absolutely delighted to share here at Lipscomb. We're glad you're here. I sit back and enjoy the evening. I'm really excited to hear the program today. And we want to celebrate the Stribling Brock German POW letters by opening it up with this very special window into a moment in history. Dr. Johnson.
Good evening, and on behalf of Sandra Parham and the rest of the staff at the Beeman Library, let me welcome you again to Lipscomb University, and welcome to this 70th anniversary commemoration. For this event, we've chosen to highlight not battles and campaigns, not famous leaders, but the human side of this significant world event. This evening, you're going to hear about these letters. You're going to hear a little known story. You're going to hear about a story about enemies who became friends. The story's not widely known, even though the story takes place right here in Tennessee. Most Tennesseans have never heard this story. And I wouldn't know this story had it not been for a chance meeting in 2013 in Lawrenceburg with a gentleman named Curtis Peters. That meeting started a 2-year relationship that ultimately involved our German language professor, Charles McVeigh, and special collections staff at the Beeman Library. And at that meeting, that is when I discovered the existence of a rather large collection of these German POW letters, written by German POWs after they returned home. And so you're going to hear different accounts of that story about those letters this evening. But we're also here to pay tribute to veterans. We want to honor veterans of all wars, but now that we have reached the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, we especially want to honor World War II veterans. At rare but often significant times, history calls on a people to accomplish something great, something for humanity. From 1941 to 1945, 15 million Americans answered their country's call, and at great personal sacrifice, ended oppression in Europe and in the Pacific. There are veterans, probably here this evening, whose personal stories are largely unknown. But the fact that their stories are unknown does not lessen the sacrifices that they made, nor does it lessen the debt that civilization owes to them. So let me, before we go any further, just ask if we have any, perhaps, World War II veterans. Are there any veterans of the Second World War here? If so, would you stand? I have not met any, and I'm not sure if we have any here. All right, how about veterans of any other war? Any veterans here who've served in the armed forces? Stand up if you would, please, and let us recognize you. And if my father were still alive, I'm sure he would be proud as a veteran of the Korean War to stand there with you. Let me speak specifically about World War II veterans for a moment, because that's really the conflict that brings us together this evening. It was that group of young men and women who left a legacy by bringing peace to a war-torn world. And they continue to leave a legacy to us and to future generations by teaching us that honorable people rise to the occasion to serve in a great cause and then return to their daily routines as productive citizens and pillars of the community. And so, for World War II veterans, but also for all of you veterans, we appreciate you, and we're honored by your presence this evening. And afterward, please stick around. There will be mingling in the back in the lobby, and if you're a veteran, we certainly want an opportunity to shake your hand and tell you thank you. Now, in your program this evening, you will see a list of speakers. Each speaker will give a brief talk. We're not going to keep you here all night. But let me very quickly run through the list of speakers and give you a quick introduction. And then they will get up as they are in the order that they're listed in the program and have some comments to make. And we'll begin with Marie Byers. She is an archivist at Beeman Library. She has been at Lipscomb for 36 years. She is the very embodiment of the living history of the institution here, and she did a lot to make tonight happen. And then I'll have a few more comments to make, followed by Curtis Peters from Lawrenceburg. Mr. Peters retired after 38 years of teaching. He's a wealth of knowledge on the history of Lawrence County. He now serves as president of the Lawrence County Historical Society. And in fact, it is through his generosity and that of the Brock and Pettis family that we're here this evening. Then Dr. Charles McVeigh will have some comments. He is the German language professor who has been working to translate the letters. Dr. McVeigh has been at Lipscomb for 41 years. He's really the one who has been in the trenches working on this project. And then he will be followed by Ines Konchevitz. Ines is a Lipscomb student, and she comes to us from Germany. And she's actually here on a golf scholarship, and the way she got here is an interesting story. But she has also been working with Dr. McVeigh on this letter project. And we're happy that she has been involved in the project, and in fact her parents are here from Germany this evening. We're pleased that they're here. And then Linda Sue Pena Andrus will share her thoughts. She's from San Antonio, Texas. She's the daughter of Captain Jesse Andrus. Captain Andrus was the captain of the guards at the Lawrenceburg camp during World War II. And then Elizabeth Rivera, the Special Collections librarian here, who has put in so many hours to make this happen. Elizabeth will close the program this evening.
Thank all of you so much for coming. A long time ago, in a forest far, far away. Actually, it was the Black Forest of Germany. The day was June 7th, 1875. A child was born, a boy. He was named Robert Henry Bowl. Fast forward to 2014. It's a June day, and I'm at work in special collections. And when I look up, Dr. Charlie McVeigh and Dr. Tim Johnson come in the door, and we began to talk. Dr. McVeigh had recently been granted a faculty summer grant to do some personal research of his interest and choice. Dr. Johnson had recently visited Lawrenceburg to pursue his particular research of choice, the Mexican-American War and Tennesseans' involvement in it. As chance would happen, he was having lunch or breakfast in a local cafe and was introduced to Curtis Peters. Now, Mr. Peters, as you've heard, is a ex-history teacher, but the history never leaves the teacher. He was telling Dr. Johnson how a member of his family, Miss Pettis, had found letters in a box, a cornflakes box. The letters were in German. Nobody had been able to read them in the family. This is the problem. Dr. Johnson says, perhaps Dr. McVeigh, a friend of mine, would like to translate your letters. Good idea. But how does he get the letters? Does Mr. Peters just let him have the letters? No. Let's go back to Lipscomb and see if they would consent to keep the letters in their special collections safely, very safe, and let Dr. McVeigh work on them. Oh, I can do that. I can do that. Our library director had just retired the month before. The new library director had not yet arrived. I had no assistants, not even a student worker, and I agreed I can keep the letters safe. They can stay right here. In a day or so, I got started getting scared. In a day or so, I got a phone call from another professor in the history department, Dr. Richard Good, and he wanted to come over and visit. So he did, and this is his story. I have a student who began an internship. He got to work about a week, and it's suddenly been terminated. Do you have anything that he can do this summer so he can get credit for an internship? Did I ever have something that he could do this summer? I had a plastic tub filled with 3 shoe boxes plus of letters. And so Walker began coming to the library. He created an archival record for each letter, opening every letter, carefully putting it in an archival folder, putting names and dates on the folders. And he worked very diligently for the months of June and July. Good point. A little bit later, as Dr. McVeigh began to think about the work and we began to wonder how it was going to happen, he brought a student worker who had helped him for a number of years, Donnie Jenkins. And Donnie's job was to take the letters that had been put in folders. He would scan the letters. He would then make a copy of the letter so that Dr. McVeigh could mark it up, highlight it, put notes in the margin, and get the translation completed. We knew there were a lot of letters. We didn't know just exactly how long it would take. The process is still ongoing, as you will hear later. And so we worked through the summer, we worked through the fall, we worked through the winter, and then we had another addition to our team. Enos came to see Dr. McVeigh. She is the student from Germany, and so she has contributed very heavily to further work, faster work on translation of the letters. Now, how did all of this relate to that day in 1875 when Robert Henry Bold was born? I'm not telling that part of the story. You'll hear that from Curtis Peters, because those links have been coming forward all the way through our story. As has been pointed out already, this is not just a war story. This is not a prisoner story. This is a feel-good story. This is a story of kindness extended to strangers. It's a story of generosity offered when you don't really expect returns. It's a story of lasting friendships. It results from the largesse that unfolds in the letters. The words of Jesus play out when he said, "I was a stranger and you took me in." A very respected friend of mine had a saying, often from the pulpit in his sermons: small steps take long journeys. And we hope that you will join us on that journey for the rest of this evening.
Well, we're getting paid this evening based on the number of times that we get up to speak. And since I made out the program, no, I didn't make out the program. But British military historian John Keegan wrote this: "The Second World War is the largest single event in human history, fought across 6 of the world's 7 continents and all of its oceans. It killed 50 million human beings, left hundreds of millions of others wounded in mind or body, and materially devastated much of the heartland of civilization." Those are sobering words. The scope and the magnitude of the Second World War was unprecedented. No nation was prepared for the level of destruction, the size of the armies that would be required to fight, the amount of economic and financial commitment that would be required to pay for the war. No country was prepared for this. No country was prepared for the number of prisoners that would be taken. U.S. forces captured over 3 million German soldiers during World War II. Now, many of them were captured in the closing weeks of the war as the German army was actually collapsing. But in 1943 and 44, tens of thousands of prisoners become hundreds of thousands of prisoners. And the problem in Europe was what to do with all of these prisoners. It was a logistical nightmare. You can imagine, the armies, Allied armies that are marching through Europe. Where do you house several 100,000 prisoners? How do you feed that many prisoners? How much of your military resources do you devote to guarding prisoners of war? It was becoming an enormous logistical problem and a nightmare. Well, every day, U.S. ships were arriving in Europe with troops and supplies, provisions, and those ships were crossing the Atlantic back to the U.S. empty. And so, in 1943, the United States agreed to begin to accept prisoners of war and bring them to the United States. And it would be easy logistically. Put them on the empty boats. After they've dropped off their supplies, send them right back across the Atlantic. And in that fashion, over 400,000 German POWs came to the United States during World War II. There were POW camps all over the country. There were several in Tennessee. And then, of course, there is the camp in Lawrenceburg, and over 300 German soldiers ended up in the camp there at Lawrenceburg. The camp was located on the property of a man named James Stribling, who farmed and was in the lumber business. Because of a labor shortage during the war, POWs could be used as laborers in non-military jobs, and they were paid about 80 cents a day. And POW workers were especially useful in agricultural tasks. Mr. Stribling used these POWs on his property. He hired some of them out to other farmers. The Stribling's daughter married into the Brock family. And the Stribling family and the Brock family developed relationships with many of these prisoners, treated them with kindness. Couple that with the fact that the War Department ensured that prisoners were adequately fed, clothed, housed, received medical attention, dental care. I mean, German soldiers couldn't believe they had it so good. Well, here's the importance of this story. As Marie said, this is not military history. I'm a military historian. This is not military history. This is cultural and social history. If you strip away the national war objectives, you strip away the political differences, agendas of conquest, you're left with human beings confronting other human beings, somewhere other than on a battlefield. War tends to be dehumanizing. I mean, there is little about a battlefield that is humane. In this case, though, the generosity of the host country, the hospitality of the people of Lawrenceburg made a lasting impression on these German soldiers. Not only were Tennesseans able to see that these enemy soldiers were actually human beings, but the Germans also could see that Americans, that Tennesseans, were honest and were civil and were humane, and that Americans were, in fact, human too. The relationships that were established in Lawrenceburg in 1944 and 1945 would last for decades, and these letters written by German POWs after they returned home are a testament to that fact. This collection is officially called the Stribling Brock German POW Letters. Their short journey from Lawrenceburg to Lipscomb was a collaborative effort involving history, foreign language, and the library. The value of this collection lies in the scholarship that can come out of it. Buried within these letters is a story, actually many stories. They're just waiting for someone to draw them out. As a historian, this collection represents fertile soil that needs to be tilled. You see, this is what research is all about. And in the years to come, curious scholars will mine this rich resource and tell the stories that are contained within. And in telling the story, that is the way that history is preserved. And we believe that the Stribling Brock letters have found a happy home. Thank you.
Wow, I'm impressed. This has been a long journey for me, getting involved with the POW letters and the history in Lawrenceburg. James Henry Stribling, quite a man, born in 1864. He lived his early life in Lawrence County, but he decided he wanted to get away. He left and went to Texas, and he made a small fortune while he was there, but he came back home because his mom had gotten sick, and he settled back in Lawrenceburg. And he was a man about making money. He was an entrepreneur, and that's the way he was going. But his family had a tragedy that hit them in 1901. His young daughter passed away, and Mr. Stribling was distraught. For several months, he didn't know what to do. He just knew he wanted to be with his young daughter. And someone suggested that he go to a revival. There was a T.B. Larimore who was preaching. And so Mr. Stribling went, and that night he got saved. And he became a very, very religious man the rest of his life. He started doing things for the community in all kinds of ways that would help out young children and adults alike. One of the things he decided to do is he wanted to build Lawrence County a high school. And so in 1908, 1909, he started the process. The high school was completed in 1910, and he's going to give it to the county. But he had two conditions. Number one, they had to teach Bible. Number two, he got to pick the Bible teacher. Okay? So the school opens in 1910, and he chooses a man by the name of Robert H. Bowl. Now, Mr. Bowl had been born in Germany, 1875, and his mother had always thought that he would grow up and become a Catholic priest. That was their religion. That had been all the family's religion for many years. But young Robert's dad passed away when he was around 9 or 10 years old. His mother ended up remarrying. Robert did not get along too good with his stepfather, so eventually at age 14 he left and came to the United States with an aunt. And she moved to Ohio, but eventually he ended up in Tennessee outside of Nashville, and he worked as a farm laborer. Well, in 1895, he decided he wanted to preach. So on a real rainy day, he made his way into town about 20 miles and met with a Mr. James Harding. Mr. Harding was president of Lipscomb Bible College, and he wanted to enroll. Well, they already had a full enrollment, and Mr. Harding didn't have any other spots, but he felt sorry for Mr. Bowl, so he went ahead and admitted Mr. Bowl to school. Mr. Bowl will go on and finish school and get out and start preaching, and I think he probably had some tent meetings and stuff that he preached in, and somewhere along the line, this is something we don't know for sure, but he met Mr. Stribling, and Mr. Stribling hired him to come to Lawrenceburg. And so he came to Lawrenceburg. He left Louisville, where he had been, went to Lawrenceburg, and he started teaching Bible at the local high school there. And he also taught Bible classes at night. He taught Bible classes on Sunday. He went to Florence, Alabama, and taught classes. But anyhow, later on that school year, he had a tragedy. His young 2-year-old daughter died. Mr. Stribling offered Mr. Bowl a burial plot next to his daughter Gladys. And so that's where she was buried, and that's where she still is today. But Mr. Bowl couldn't stay in Lawrenceburg anymore, so he left and went back to Louisville, where he will continue to stay for around 50 years and preach in one church. Mr. Stribling went on and did several things in the county. We could spend hours talking about that. But in the 1930s, he managed to get the Civilian Conservation Corps, which the government was sponsoring to help put young boys to work. He got one placed in Lawrenceburg, and he got it put on his land, which was called Pine Bluff, which was right on the edge of Lawrenceburg at that time. Today it's inside the city limits. But on Pine Bluff, the CCC built a camp, and they built buildings and stuff, and they stayed there till World War I ended. And when World War II started. And so when it started, all these young men left and went off to war. And when they left and went to war, the manpower around there was gone. All the other local boys had left and gone to war. And so they didn't have them around anymore. So we'll fast forward a little bit to 1944. Mr. Stribling pulled a few strings, and there was going to be a POW camp placed somewhere in that area. They had probably planned on putting it in Lewis County, and it was actually going to be a sub-camp of Camp Forest in Tullahoma. Camp Forest was one of the larger camps in Tennessee. They had the capacity for 26,000 prisoners. And they had several sub-camps, and they would send these German prisoners out to the local areas, and they would work doing things that would not help the war effort. And so they were coming to Lawrenceburg, and their main purpose there was to cut wood for the Wrigley Company in Dixon, Tennessee. And so Mr. Stribling managed to get them there, and guess where they were? They were on Pine Bluff, a place that had already been created by the CCC. It was a natural place for a prison camp. It had two sides that were pretty steep, so it was isolated, and so that's where the camp was established. And these prisoners would be carried out every day to cut wood, and some of them would go out and work on farms. And there were 6 particular. I don't know how they ended up with this certain number, but there were 6 of them, and probably others over time, that went to work on the Stribling farm. And farm workers would pick them up and carry them out, and they'd work on the farm. We actually have photos of them on the farm with the PWs on their pants legs and the PW on the seat of the pants. And so they would go out there pretty much every day and work on the farm. And so Mr. Stribling got to know them real well. And then his daughter, James Lois Stribling Brock, and her husband, Delmer, also got to visit with them and know them. We have pictures that they made. You know, can you imagine standing around a car out on the farm and you get your picture made with some of the farm workers and 6 of the German POWs? You know, we have several of those photos that were made that day where they were standing around the car. And so in that period of time, they got to know them, and they were around them, and they managed to communicate some way. Tell you a story that happened. Delmer Brock, Miss Aunt Jim's, what we call her, but Aunt Jim's husband, Delmer, went to Nashville, bought some oil paints and brushes, and brought them back, and he slipped them through the fence at the POW camp to Eugene Hirth, who was one of the German prisoners. Well, Eugene took a bed sheet and starched it, and he painted a painting about 2 foot by 3 foot of the last things that he remembered on the coast of northern Africa the day before he was captured. And you see that painting up here now. And I had to bring this at risk of my life. My brother-in-law, you know, he says, "Where's this going to be tonight?" And so here it is. So everybody can see it. But this painting is awesome. You need to come up and look at it when we get done and check it out. But he keeps that hanging proudly in his office as you know, a remembrance of these German prisoners that were there. They did other things. They carved little horses for the Brocks. We have one out of wood and one out of marble, and one is done out of lead. And the bottom of the lead one says "Prisoner of War, Eugene Hirth" on it. So a lot of things like that, where you would see they were making this communication back and forth. Another very interesting story: the night before they were to be carried back, these 6 prisoners slipped out of camp, and they walked about 2 miles into town and knocked on the Brock's door to tell them bye. Then they walked back and slipped back into camp just like nothing had happened. You know, and you can see over time the attitude changes on the people there. If you saw some of the papers that we have on display, when the first word came that there was actually going to be a POW camp in Lawrenceburg, you know, the paper says Nazis are coming. You know, and a few weeks later, Nazis have arrived. And you jump on ahead about 2 or 3 months, German prisoners cutting wood, German prisoners working on farms. And then when they get ready, after a 2-year period of time, they were there from April of 1944 to about March of 1946. And the last newspaper article, or the second to last one we have, it says, "German boys are going home." Now that ought to tell you something right there, and the relationship or how they viewed them over that period of time. I mean, there were times when they were scared. We had an incident where 2 of them escaped, you know, and they ended up getting captured about 3 or 4 days in the county next to us, and they had all the big write-up in the paper about them escaping, and it had their height. They were like 5'6", 5'7", 120 pounds, 130 pounds, and their ages were 20, 21. So these were young boys, you know, that had been drafted into the Army and gone off to fight. And so it's pretty interesting how the viewpoint changed over time. So the prisoners leave, and before they even get home, they start writing letters. Some of the letters we have, I think, were actually received while they were still prisoners in England and France, waiting to be released to go back to Germany. And it's not just these 6 prisoners that worked there all the time. Them and several of their friends who knew Mr. Stribling and the Brocks also wrote letters. And Dr. McVeigh can probably tell you how many there are. I think there's excess of 30 different prisoners that are writing these letters back to them. But they start at the end of 1946, and they continue to write these letters all the way up into the 1970s. 30 years. And that is awesome that they communicate with them over a 30-year period of time. But there's a problem with that. These letters are being written in German and sent to the Brocks and Mr. Stribling. Now, the letters we have are pretty much all addressed to Mr. and Miss Delmer Brock. I'm sure Mr. Stribling, through the letters he got away, we do know in the ledger book he had, there is a long list of these German prisoners that he has sent letters to. So he had gotten letters from them and then replied back to them. His house burnt, so a lot of those letters probably disappeared at that time. But they're getting these letters written to them in German. What do? You know, you got to have somebody translate them for you. Guess what? There's a gentleman who lives in Louisville, Kentucky. His name is Robert H. Bow. Born in Germany. he married a girl from Germany in the United States. And so they would send these letters to Mr. Bowl. He would translate those letters for them and send them back to Lawrenceburg. And so we get the first translations. Now, a few of those translations are still with the letters. Several other ones were gone. But over time, that's how they operated, send those letters to Mr. Bowl, and he'll translate them. So there we have this connection with Mr. Bowl, the connection with Lipscomb University, and Mr. Stribling and the Brocks. And that's just an awesome story. So fast forward that, Miss Brock passed away in 1988, and my mother-in-law inherited a few things, and her and my sister-in-law Lynn were over at the house one day picking up some things, and Lynn was snooping around. And she went upstairs and opened a closet. Not much in that closet, but down on the floor was a cornflake box. The first thing that went through her mind was, love letters from Aunt Jim to Delmer. And so she took those love letters home and started looking at them, and they weren't love letters. They were written in German. And so she started reading the ones she could and was fascinated with that. And so she wanted to save them. And so she put them in a plastic container to save all those letters and threw away the cornflake box. And everybody keeps asking me, where's the cornflake box? Well, it's gone. So be careful. But she put those up, and she's kept them. We knew we had them. They've been in the family for years. I've looked at them many times, and we pull them out and look at them and look at the horses and stuff like that. But I retired around 2000. I knew I'd do that eventually. I retired around 2010, 2011. See, it was time for me to retire because I had a young lady in class, and I taught her grandmother. But when I retired, I started doing stuff with the Historical Society, and Bobby Alford, who was the president at that time, said, why don't you do something over the POW camp? Well, he knew we had the connection with some of the family things, and so I got the letters from Lynn and started doing some stuff and did a presentation there, and it went pretty good. We had a big crowd, and everybody got really interested in it. And so I found out a few more things, found more pictures that nobody had ever seen before. So that Christmas, I put all this stuff together into like a little scrapbook thing, and I gave it to my brother-in-law, Tim. And he was really interested when he opened it up. But the thought that went through his mind was, let's do a book. And so we got with Miss Kathy Gandy and her husband, Charles, and together, we got Miss Kathy to do the book about Mr. Stribling and the POW letters. And so that book was done in 2012 to 2013, and it got released around April of 2013. Well, May of 2013, I go down to the Square 40 where I go every morning to eat breakfast, and Shine, who is the owner of the restaurant, he kind of meets me halfway in the door, and he said, I got somebody here you need to meet. He said, it's a professor from Lipscomb, and so he carries me over and introduces me to Tim. And I'm going to call him Tim. I'm not calling him Dr. Johnson because he and I, there's a friendship that has developed there with Tim and with Charlie. And so I feel very close to them now. But he introduced me to Tim, and we sat down. He invited me to sit down with him. That was a mistake, I guess. But we started talking about history. He started telling me about what he was researching. And, of course, I had to throw out a little local history because we're loaded with it. And so I started telling him local history. And I had to give him one of those books because I was really proud of the book that Kathy had done. So I gave him one of the books and started telling him about the POW camp. And he's really interested in that too. Well, he left, and a few months later, he came back down doing some more research, and I went down to the archives and started talking to him, and that's where we're sitting around talking. He said, have you thought about donating those letters anywhere, putting them in archives or maybe in a library? He said, Lipscomb would love to have those letters. Kind of threw the gauntlet out there at me. And I said, no, I hadn't thought about it, but said, I'll discuss that with Lynn and Tim. And I talked to Tim. I said, that's probably a good idea rather than have those letters stuck back in a plastic container in a closet, Get them somewhere where people can see them and research them and do stuff with them. And so I got in touch with him, and I said, that's a pretty good idea. And so he got with Dr. McVeigh, Charlie, and brought him down one day. And I took all that. Now, you got to remember that Tim has not seen these letters. He's going on blind faith. He had never seen the letters, just what was in the book. And so they met with me down at the local museum that we have there, and I brought those letters down, and we opened that up, and Charlie's eyes are just huge at the amount of letters there were. And he pulls them out and starts reading them, and the first thing I remember he said, this is old German, And so we went out and toured the POW side and talked about the letters and everything, and it just kind of has snowballed since that. In I think it was July of 2014, I brought the letters up to Lipscomb to the library and met several of the people up here, tried to tell the story about Mr. Stribling and the Brocks and the letters, and I left them there with the safekeeping for Sandra and her staff here at Lipscomb, and so they've had them to work on a while. We were interviewed, of course, by the Tennessean in early this year, and the front page story came out on the Tennessean on that Saturday. I'm sitting in my chair on Sunday night. I pull up my iPad, USA Today, about the third story down. And I wow, The next day I come home from meeting at the Square 40, and I get a call, and it's from a newspaper reporter in New York, and she's for ABC. And so she interviews me, and then it's on Yahoo.com and the London Daily Mail and NBC News. And so it has really taken on a life of its own, I think. And I think it's all for the good of the story and the good for Lipscomb University and the good for Lawrenceburg. And I appreciate everything that everybody has done working to get this story out there. And I could stand here and tell you stories about it for days, but Elizabeth told me I had to hush up. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
I would enjoy hearing a few more stories from Curtis, to tell you the truth, and I can't wait to get back to the Square 40 and meet some more folks from Lawrenceburg, and let's have another good meal together. This is a wonderful team. I'm just part of a tremendous team. You're seeing some of them already, and some more will be presenting in just a few minutes. I'd like to take just a few moments and read, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and read just portions of some of the letters. Now, the words are fairly plain, the needs are fairly simple, but the relationships that underlie these words are precious and are things that, especially in a time of war and hate and death and trouble, are just amazing. I think we see American kindness, Southern Lawrenceburg hospitality, and Christian compassion. And then we see that reflected in the attitudes and the feelings of these young German boys. Many of them were in Rommel's Corps in Africa, seeing death and destruction at the age 16 and 17. When they reach Lawrenceburg, it's almost with welcome arms and homes that take care of them, that love them, and appreciate what they do. These gentlemen, these young men will show in their letters concern for their own comrades who are now spread all over Germany and Austria. They don't know where they are. They don't know how they're doing. Some of them are still being held in England to help clean up after the bombing of London and so forth. They're beginning to learn professions. They're beginning to start families. They're beginning to get married and go on with their lives in Germany. But they've come back to a Germany that's really in terrible shape. It's been destroyed in many ways. Let me read from a young man from Austria. Dear Brock family, I received your letter of the 14th of May with great joy and gratitude, and this is in 1947. I'm happy to know that you received a small package from me, and I know it took a long time to reach you. It had a long journey behind it and a lot of my love and concern. How have you all been? You wrote that Eric and Heinrich and Helmut are still in England, whereas I've been home for almost a year now. Time's really passing quickly, and I hope that they too can soon be fortunate enough to return home and be with their parents, if their parents are still there. Today I'm including a picture of me and one of my sweetheart who will become my wife. The picture didn't turn out all that well, but it's the only one I have, and I'm always thinking of you all. You're Gottfried. 2 years later, later that year, 6 months later, his girlfriend, soon to be his wife, writes, Dear Mrs. Brock, Christmas is right around the corner. And it's such a time, it's bad that I cannot find a good Christmas present for Gottfried. I don't know what I should buy for my husband. Everything is so expensive that you just can't buy anything. And since Gottfried smokes so much, I'd like to request if you could send me just 1 pack of cigarettes. So I'll close with best greetings from your Austria friend, Maria, soon to be Maria Rest. The same Christmas from a young man who was sent back to the Soviet zone, Eric Tiemann. I have a special reason for this, since I've received a wonderful package on Wednesday from you all. It was a wonderful Christmas present for me. I've seldom been so richly gifted. The things you sent me fit very well, except for a pair of pants, which I had to make a little smaller. The shoes fit very well, You cannot imagine how happy I am. All these things are very seldom available here in Germany, and then only on the black market. Above all, I'd like to point out that the shoes you sent me just don't exist. The things we have are made of rubber. Nothing made of leather like you sent me. I'm so happy that now I once again can dress acceptably. And for this reason, I continue to thank you, dear Brock family, and I would like to make you happy. Thank you for everything, your friend Eric. 2 years later, this is the same Eric writing. He's in the Soviet zone. Things have really gotten difficult. As far as daily life is concerned, things could be better. If I had imagined that things were as they actually are in Germany, that is in the East Russian zone, I would never have stayed here. There is no longer life here. People may soon lose their courage here, but you have to keep on regardless. Perhaps things will get better at some point. You're probably surprised for sure when you open my letters. You see I have a tiny daughter. In the picture, she's just 3 months old, born a few months ago. She brings great happiness. A few days ago, she got her first teeth. See, this is just everyday things you talk to your family about, but they're precious because of the relationship beneath them. We don't have anything like chocolate or cocoa or sweet things, and only seldom can one get porridge or pudding. This is 4 years after the war is over. We do not even try to think about even having dry milk. There is really just not enough money to really live, or just enough to have enough to eat. The same year from Hanover, Germany, a fellow who signs his letter, your German boy Gustav, says, well, first tidings of spring have arrived, and of course they came from you. There were wonderful packages, 3 in all. Our joy at home was very great, so I want to express my heartfelt thanks along with those of all my family. Indeed, Mrs. Brock has always known what was the right thing for us here. Every day I think of you, and I'm back on the farm in my spirit. Work is starting up again here, and every day I tell the people about you, about white bread, about watermelons, about cotton and such things that are not known here in Germany. Oh, also about cows without horns. Who knew? Who knew? My dear Mr. and Mrs. Brock, let me help you with the shoe sizes of the individual other boys that you need to help out. It's very difficult. Johannes is an 8.5. Leo is certainly a 9. But here, if you have an 8.5, you probably have an opportunity to exchange it. So I'm just a 7.5, if that's okay. There are a lot of packages coming over here from the U.S. Many people, many Germans have relatives in the United States who help lessen the need for what we have here in Germany. We all do indeed hope that this has been the last hard winter for us. I'll just mention the winter of 1945 in Berlin. Every tree was cut down just to keep people warm and keep people alive. This is several years later. Things are still difficult. Hopefully the other POWs, 2 years later, who are still located in other countries, will soon be coming home as well. Some of them didn't return to Russia until the 1950s. I wish you every good and blessed harvest, because he worked on their harvest back there. He knew what that was all about. When do you think you might make your trip here? They are expecting the Brocks to come to Germany to visit them. I'm looking forward to a reunion with you, your German boy, Gustav. From the U.S. zone, I'll mention John Valkulik. John was not one of the inner 6. He was one of the fellows kind of on the outside. In fact, he writes a letter to Mr. Bowl and says, Mr. Bowl, they just didn't quite like me as much as they liked the other 6. But now, don't go telling Miss Brock about that. And it was very interesting to see him talk to Mr. Bowl. Here's his letter, and I'll close with this. Dear Brock family, we also celebrated our engagement with a small circle of friends, my new wife and I. My friend gifted me with some real whole bean coffee, and the cake tasted wonderful as well. There's something, the coffee that some people have not been able to afford for a long time now. Then we were at this church for a Christmas pageant. It was performed by the entire youth group, very beautiful indeed. Christmas is really the most beautiful time of the year. One thinks of his past. Think of his past, what it must have been like. One thinks of his youth. His youth was spent in northern Africa in Ramos Corps. One thinks of his loved ones and of his home and of his father's house. At that moment, I had to weep. But what can be done otherwise about this? We are living in such a crazy time of the 20th century. See if I can get my letter back here. I was at the end of the letter there. Well, I lost the end of the letter. But he goes on to say, we have just a little bit of hope left, and this is still 3 or 4 years after the war. And he says, maybe the sun will shine again tomorrow. And there was a short story written shortly after the war about a family that the husband and the mother, the children couldn't get along. They couldn't get enough to eat. And the last thing he says to his son is, Vielleicht scheint morgen die Sonne wieder. Perhaps tomorrow the sun will shine again. These people were truly desperate, but they were truly grateful at the same time, and this is a wonderful relationship. Let me introduce to you Ines Konchevitz, who really is the best translator of these letters. She corrects my mistakes for me. So she is vital to this project for sure. And she has some things to share with you as well here. Oh, thank you. Let me mention that the German government was having Mr. Thomas Wulfling, who is the deputy consul of the consulate in Atlanta, come to be with us tonight to make a presentation for the German government regarding this collection. He's unable to be here tonight because of family matters, but he sent this letter, which Ines will now read for us as a representative of Germany.
Thank you, Professor McVeigh. Dear Professor McVeigh, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, at first, I'd like to apologize not to be present on this memorable occasion today due to urgent family matters. The Stribling Brock collection is another milestone in the relations between the US and Germany after the horrors of World War II. We as Germans deeply appreciate the help, support, and protection we received from our American friends after the war. Without the US, our democracy, economic success, and the overall peaceful environment we enjoy in Europe today would not have been possible. As these letters of former German POWs confirm, we achieved, after bitter fighting, a friendship between our countries that has hardly any parallel in the world. They show how former enemies turn into friends. The 70 years commemoration of the end of World War II is an excellent occasion for remembering our achievements since then. As much as we enjoy our peace and prosperity together, we must never forget the horrors of the war period, and we must work together with all our commitment to ensure that our freedom and liberty can also be enjoyed by others who will suffer from oppression and violence. I hope we can use the collection in order to remind the families of the former POWs as to what happened then. I want to thank all the organizers for their hard work and their commitment in this endeavor. This project is another milestone in the building of our friendship. I pledge my full support for all further related plans and activities and look forward to seeing the collection in person and meet you at the earliest possible date. With my best wishes for the official unveiling, sincerely, Thomas Wulfing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to be here with you tonight to commemorate this wonderful collection of letters. Letters that were written by my fellow Germans who lived through World War II, who were brought as prisoners to America, expecting hate and animosity, but experiencing kindness, generosity, and Southern hospitality. After studying these letters, I learned two important lessons that I would like to share with you tonight. The first lesson I learned from Johannes Hartmann, who was one of the former prisoners of war, and he wrote on January 6, 1948, Dear Mrs. Brock, on Christmas Eve I found your greetings with that very nice picture placed under our Christmas tree. It was the best gift what I got to Christmas. I thank you, dear friends, so very much for it. I cannot find the right words to show and to tell you what this letter means to me on that eve. Being born on the 25th of December 1994, yeah, I'm younger, I had quite different experiences and expectations from Christmas. than Johannes Hartmann surely had. And through Johannes Hartmann and all the other letters, I learned to take many things not granted anymore. Things like shoes, clothes, food, even washing soap that was not sufficient in post-war Germany. I learned to be thankful. The second lesson I learned from Johann Meik, who was the father of one of the former prisoners of war. And he wrote in German, Ich finde es so schön, dass es doch Menschen auf dem Erdboden gibt, die nicht Böses mit Bösem vergelten, sondern anderen Menschen, die ihnen Leid zugefügt haben, doch noch etwas Gutes antun. It means I'm so happy or glad that there are still people in the world who do not recompensate, sorry. English is not my native language. Who do not recompensate evil with evil, but do good to a people that showed them evil. So basically, his statement leads us far back to someone who's already given us a similar commandment, and I'm referring to Jesus Christ, who told us, love your enemies. And personally, I totally underestimated this commandment. I underestimated the power that this commandment, that this love that Jesus has shown us and that he has given us, what this love has. And that the fruit that it can produce, fruit of hope, of joy, in a time of hardships, in a time of war. And tonight, as a German, I want to thank you, Americans, for the kindness and the love that you've shown us in a time of war, in a time of hardships. And may God richly bless you for that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda Sue Andres Pena. I have resided in San Antonio, Texas for the last 60 years. I was born in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee at the local clinic 70 years ago on July 25th, 1945, while my father was the commanding officer of the POW camp. His name was Captain Jesse Andrus. Him, my mama, and my older sister Barbara moved to the camp October 1st, 1944. We resided there at the camp until February 15th, 1946. My story comes from my parents and the pictures and letters handed down to me. What I know is the prisoners of war adored my dad. The prisoners made and offered a gift for his lovely born daughter, a heart-shaped locket stamped with initials LA. I still wear it. I have it on. I have held this dear for 70 years, and I am wearing it today. I have brought my letters and pictures to add to this wonderful collection. Some of the special stories told to me include lullabies sung by the prisoners to my sister and I in the evenings, and in the garden my father requested very nicely to be planted by the prisoners around the flagpole. When the garden bloomed, there was a perfect swastika. Daddy kindly asked that they remove it and start all over. My sister was given some baby chicks by some of the prisoners, and she would hold them tightly, and while singing, "Yes, Jesus loves me," a little too tight because they didn't quite make it. These scattered memories have always been in a shoebox along the black and white 3x5 pictures and stained letters until recent years. These letters write about our family already, what our family already knew about, that my father was a warm, caring, and fair man, not only to the ones he loved, but to everyone. The letters talk about his gentleness and fairness to all. The pictures picture my family even before my arrival as we prepared to go overseas and to the towns and camps themselves. And when Daddy won Serviceman of the Month at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, that was about 1956. I am honored to return to Tennessee on this special occasion and to share this story along with remarkable letters and photos from the German POWs, and with you and the Lipscomb University and their Beeman Library Collection and Archives. I would like to thank Elizabeth Rivera, Curtis Peters for allowing me to share my story and the story of my family. I'm going to tell you how I found out about this a couple of Sundays ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago now? It was on the evening news, national news. And you know, you go in and out of a room and you don't think nothing of it. And then I saw Lawrenceburg and I went, well, that popped in the old mind. And I got to think about that one. So the next morning I called the Chamber of Commerce of Lawrenceburg. And they in turn put me in touch with Curtis. And this is how I progressed to come here to be with y'all. And I'm very touched. Thank you.
What a wonderful evening this has been to come together to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Your presence here demonstrates that there is still an ongoing interest among Americans in what Tom Brokaw declared as the greatest generation. The stories that you have heard tonight highlight individuals who may be perceived as ordinary, but who are actually extraordinary. They have left us with a thriving legacy of the power of hospitality and generosity. Southern hospitality at its finest binds people together. Because of this deep connection these Germans felt to the Stribling Brock family, they wrote letters, many letters. And now these letters are a permanent primary resource that is open and available to the public at Beeman Library. And so tonight it is my honor and my privilege to announce to you this evening that the Friends of Beeman Library have contributed the historical marker that will be posted at the campsite in Lawrence County. The inscription on this historical marker will read, POW Camp Lawrenceburg, 1944 to 1946. German prisoners of war were held in a camp on this site from April 1944 to February 1946. The camp was set in buildings formerly used by Company 448 of the Civilian Conservation Corps. This 30-acre site was one of the 3 subcamps of Camp Forest in Tullahoma, Tennessee. A total of 331 captured prisoners were housed in tent barracks on the southwest part of Pine Bluff, owned by James Henry Stribling. The prisoners cut wood for the Wrigley chemical plant and occasionally worked as farmhands on local farms. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your interest in these stories and the letters that tell these stories. Be sure to visit Beeman Library to peruse the exhibits that highlight the relationships among the prisoners of war and the Stribling Brock family. Beeman Library sees tonight as the first of many events collaborating with departments across Lipscomb University. Coffee is available in the lobby. Thank you for coming. Continue this conversation together, and blessings on your journey home.